Greetings! Welcome to session number 3 in my game theory series. Today we're going to be talking about the rubber bone of game theory, which is the prisoner's dilemma. So this is what I mean when I say the rubber bone of game theory is I mean that this dilemma is pretty central to game theory in the sense that it was first developed, at least the version we're going to talk about, in 1950, a little bit refined in 1951, and that's the one we're going to talk about. That was developed by Albert Tucker. Initially he was doing a play on Merrill Flood and Melvin Dretcher. They first developed in 1950, and then this man, Albert Tucker, wrote a paper on it and sort of developed the specific version we're going to talk about here today in 1951. But nonetheless, since that time period, so for like almost 70 years essentially, like philosophers, psychologists, political scientists, economists have all developed different versions of it and have, attempted to try and solve it. But it essentially seems like an unsolvable dilemma. Like it's just such a mind, you're gonna see. So, with that being said, let's just dive right into it. There are two accomplices, two criminals who have just committed a theft, and currently they are speeding away from that theft, trying to make a break for it. However, the police, who are on the lookout for anyone doing just that, on account of they're aware of the crime that's just been committed, catch wind of these two, speeding down the highway. So they pull them over and bring them into the police station. So although they don't have evidence that these two accomplices have committed the crime, they only have this suspicion that they have on account of the speeding and on account of the crime just being committed not too far off. So they bring them in, separate them into different cells, and before you know it, a detective comes in to talk to one of them to offer them, a plea deal. So, I'm gonna make you an offer you can't refuse. I don't know if that's how it actually goes, but well, apparently it's not an offer you can't refuse, it's an offer you can't even choose. Okay, so we got a little sidetracked there. So, woman comes in and she says, so if you confess, so we'll say that the first prisoner or accomplice, we'll call them A1. So if A1 confesses, then you will serve no time in jail. Alright, and that is if you confess to this, theft. But if you confess and go for this option, you must also, we'll put an I here for implicate accomplice 2, in which case accomplice 2, so your partner in crime, will serve 10 years in jail, right? And so the trick here is that this also applies for the other accomplice. The same offer will be made to the other accomplice to sell out the first accomplice. Okay, so in which case, if both accomplice 1 plus accomplice 2 confess, then you'll both spend 5 years in jail. Right? And if you both just, shut up and don't say anything, if you don't sell each other out, then you'll both only spend 1 year in prison. So one way to, graph this graphically is to put it like this. So here we've got our negation symbol C, don't confess, C, confess, and etc. So here we've got accomplice 1, accomplice 2. The first number in each box is accomplice 1, and then the second one is accomplice 2. So what we've got is, if accomplice 1 confesses, and so does accomplice 2, then both go into jail for 5 years. However, if accomplice 1 doesn't confess and accomplice 2 does confess, then accomplice 1 is going to jail for 10 years, and accomplice 2 is walking away free. And then similarly, if accomplice 1 confesses, but accomplice 2 doesn't confess, then accomplice 1 is going to jail for no years, and accomplice 2 is going to jail for 10 years, and then conversely, if they both just, as I said, shut up, you're both only going to jail for 1 year, because, the lady will just go extra hard on you two both for your speeding. So the problem is, as I said, what do you choose? What do you do, right? Because the obvious intuitive answer to this, when you're looking at this, you're like, well, obviously you should just both be quiet, right? But the logical problem with that is that in order to make that choice, you have to suppose that the other person is going to think like you're going to think, right? You have to suppose that you're both going to look at these options and you're both going to draw the same conclusion, okay? However, the problem with that is that that's sort of a logical fallacy in itself. You can't assume that someone else is going to think the same way that you're going to think. It's just not a justifiable, assertion. So, and moreover, the other problem with that is that, like, let's say of the two accomplices, one of them, or they both think that they should do that. They both think that, the other person will think like I think, and then therefore we should both be quiet. However, if one of them realizes that, they all could also realize that they could trap the other person, right? So if I think that the other accomplice is going to be quiet so that, we'll both only go to jail for 1 year, well then I could trap them and I could confess and implicate them, right? So I could, be mischievous and I could walk away free and set them in there for 10 years. And conversely, they could do that to me. So you're pretty much trapped. Or alternatively, you could both try and do that and then you're both going to jail for 5 years. So the conundrum is that there's really no way to get out of this. There's no way for you to know what another person's gonna think, right? There's no way for you to determine what they're gonna choose. So you are, in other words, trapped. In terms of moving into an analysis of this, one way I like to, or I try to like to, or I like to, and therefore I try to, conceptualize philosophical problems, dilemmas, when I can, is on a more personal level. I find it sometimes makes it easier to understand, or even just provides another way of looking at how, again, games inform our lives, or how they're present in our lives, or how such problems as the prisoner's dilemma manifest in actual reality, and they're not just, abstract concepts. So relationships, my least favorite topic of inquiry. So let's put this in relationship terms. So typically when we enter a relationship, the, normative thing is that most people want to be in a monogamous relationship, and when you enter into that monogamous relationship, there's always kind of like a latent anxiety for the most part, or for some part, to some degree of a part of the thing. There is some anxiety that at any given moment that person could cheat on you. That's why people are so, hyper conscious of little, micro things that the other does, because, do these micro things suggest that, you're doing something else? The point being, which is another deeper philosophical problem of reality, is that you never know what another person is thinking, right? So at any given time, there's no way for me to, ever see into your brain, and there's no way for you to ever see into my brain. We can only ever infer what's going on in each other's brains from how we choose to behave, what behaviors we exhibit, the kinds of things we say, just our general actions. So in other words, you never know what's happening beneath the surface. You can only ever infer from the surface itself what's happening behind the surface, and that whole surface, could just, for all you know, be a complete illusion. It could just be something constructed in order for the person to get what they want, whatever. Typically we hope and assume that's not the case, and we enter the relationship under the goodwill that, we're not going to do that to each other, we're gonna make it work. But to put this in, to sort of tie that problematic into a prisoner's dilemma, the issue is that at any given time, the other could be cheating. The other could be doing something wrong. And if it is the case that the other is cheating and doing something wrong, well then that would put me in a position of potentially being hurt, right? Potentially suffering a loss. So if I am to find out, or if that my, partner is to leave me for this someone else, well then I'm in line for some emotional turmoil, all the harsh feelings and all the bad feelings that would come with being cheated on, I would be subjected to. So then, if I, love that person, I don't really want to walk away from them, but I'm nervous and I don't know what to do, it kind of puts me in a position where, well, I could also cheat on you, right? So if I were to cheat on you, then if you're cheating on me, and leave me potentially, then, well, it won't matter that much. Yeah, I still suffer a loss, but, at least I have this rebound over here, which you also unfortunately have, and we just obliterate each other. Or, well, so, that's one option. So really, that's several options. So the first option would be, perhaps they're cheating, and I'm not, and therefore I get hurt, or we both cheat so that we both don't get hurt, or I think that and cheat and hurt the other person when they're not cheating, right? So then our fourth option, though, of course, would be, it would be better that, you know, we both just don't do that, and on the goodwill, assume, you know, the golden rule and do unto others as we would have done unto ourselves, and just don't do it. But the reason that's problematic is because even if you choose that last option that seems like the best option, just like in the prisoner's dilemma, you're still setting yourself up for that potential failure on account of the fact that you can never read that person's mind. I can't communicate with the person in the other jail cell either, and determine that, you know, we both have this idea that we want to pursue what's mutually beneficial for both of us. So it's an unsolvable dilemma. There's no real way to ever, for one person in a relationship to ever be sure that they're, you know, completely safe, you know, we're both doing the right thing. There's no way for either person to ever fully know that. It's impossible. And the same thing applies to the prisoner's dilemma. There's no way for you to know what the hell that person's gonna do, and therefore you're sort of screwed, because whatever they choose, whatever they do, has a direct effect on me and what happens to me. So reality, right? It's like really difficult. But yeah, so that's the prisoner's dilemma, and that's my, you know, concrete example of it, and I'm sure you could work out some other prisoner's dilemmas of your own. So if you think you have a solution, please be obliged to leave that solution in the comments, although I'm sure you don't have a solution. But if you have, you know, any interesting ideas, please, you know, or if you do have a solution, if you think you do, leave it below, and we'll see. And yes, so that was session 3 of game theory, and coincidentally next session, which I said this one would be next week, but, you know, next one will now be next week because I was excited to do this. We'll be talking about the golden rule and how that manifests in game theory, which, you know, would have been beneficial for us here if it had actually worked.